Most people never think about who shows up after the crime scene tape comes down. The investigators leave. The body gets taken away. The news vans eventually move on. And then silence. And someone like me gets the call. For 10 years, I was that person. I walked into homes after murders, after suicides, after people died alone and weren't found for weeks. Sometimes months. I wasn't a detective. I wasn't a paramedic. My job was to clean up what was left, and then make it look like nothing ever happened. This is what I saw. Here's the first thing most people don't know. The police don't clean crime scenes. The city doesn't either. After law enforcement finishes their investigation and the medical examiner removes the body, that responsibility falls to whoever owns the property. Usually, that means the victim's family. Think about that for a second. You just lost someone, and now you're told that cleaning up is your problem. That's where companies like the one I worked for come in. We're called biohazard remediation technicians, trauma cleaners. Some people just call us crime scene cleaners, though that's only part of what we do. There are about 400 companies operating in this space across the U.S. It's a roughly $500 million a year industry. Most people have no idea it exists. I got into it the way a lot of people do, by accident. I had a background in construction. A friend told me about an opening. The pay was decent, the hours were flexible. Nobody warned me about the rest. First week, I cleaned 3 apartments. 1 overdose, 1 suicide, 1, they told us, was an unattended death, meaning someone who had died alone, and no one noticed for a while. I went home that Friday and sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could go inside. I didn't quit, but I was different after that week. Something shifts in you. Let me walk you through what we actually do, because it's nothing like what you see on TV. When a call comes in, we respond 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Trauma doesn't keep office hours. Most calls come in at night or on weekends. We show up in full PP, Tyvek suits, and 95 respirators, double-layered nitrile gloves, boot covers. We look like we're walking into a hazardous materials site. Because our blood carries pathogens, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, HIV, bacteria that most cleaning products can't touch. You don't cut corners. The first thing we do is a site assessment. We identify primary contamination, where the main event happened, and secondary contamination. Because blood doesn't stay in one place. It gets into carpet padding, subfloor, drywall, air ducts. Most people think cleaning means scrubbing. That's maybe 10% of the job. The rest is removing. Carpet comes up. Baseboards come off. Drywall gets cut out in sections. Anything porous that has been contaminated, it can't be clean. It has to go. Everything gets bagged, labeled, and disposed of as biohazardous waste. It goes into red biohazard bags, then into thick plastic containers, then picked up by a licensed disposal company. After removal, we disinfect using EPA-registered hospital-grade chemicals. Then we test the air quality. Then we reconstruct, tash the drywall, lay new flooring, sometimes paint an entire room. By the time we leave, the room looks like nothing happened. That's the job. People always ask me what the worst scenes were. They expect me to describe something graphic, but that's not actually what stays with you. What stays with you are the details. The unfinished bowl of cereal on the kitchen table. The library book still open on the nightstand with a bookmark halfway through. A child's drawing taped to the refrigerator, drawn in crayon, the name spelled wrong at the bottom. Those are the things that follow you home. I cleaned up after a man who had lived alone in a 2-bedroom house in Ohio for 11 years. His neighbor called it in. He had been there for an estimated 5 weeks before anyone noticed. 5 weeks. There were photographs on the wall. He had grandchildren. A shelf full of trophies from a bowling league. A birthday card on the counter from 3 years ago that he still hadn't thrown away. Someone had loved him. And then somehow, in the end, no one knew. I think about him more than anyone else from those 10 years. Not because of what the scene looked like, but because of who it suggested he was and how completely invisible his death had been. I've cleaned up after domestic violence, after gang violence, after accidents, after people who had simply given up. One thing I can tell you, after all of it, is this: the type of neighborhood doesn't matter. We got called into million-dollar homes in the suburbs just as often as we did into apartment buildings downtown. Tragedy is not a class issue. Loneliness is not a class issue. Tane finds everyone. The hardest part of this job wasn't the scenes. It was the families. Because we're not just cleaning a space. We're walking into the worst day, sometimes the worst week, the worst month of someone's life. And they're standing right there. Sometimes they want to watch, to make sure we're respectful, to make sure we treat the space like it matters, because to them, it's not a job site. It's where their person live. Sometimes they can't look. They sit outside or in a car down the street, and they wait. I learned to read people fast in this job. There were families who needed to talk, who would tell me everything about the person, their sense of humor, what they liked to cook, what kind of music they play, and I would listen, because sometimes the most important thing you can do in that moment isn't to clean faster. I had a woman, I'll call her Margaret, whose husband had died suddenly in their living room. Heart attack. The EMTs had tried to save him. By the time we arrived, the room was a different kind of scene. She stood in the doorway for almost an hour. She wasn't crying anymore. She was just watching us work. And at one point she said, quietly, not really to me, she said, he sat in that chair every single morning for 42 years. She wasn't asking for a response. She just needed someone to hear it. I never forgot that. After 10 years, I started to see patterns. Things this job teaches you about the country that you can't learn anywhere else. The first is how deeply alone a lot of Americans are. Unattended deaths, people who died and aren't found for days or weeks, are more common than most people realize. They happen in cities, in quiet suburbs, in small towns where everyone supposedly knows everyone. The coroner's office in Los Angeles handles thousands of these cases every year. In New York, it's similar. There are people living 30 feet from their neighbors who would not be found for a month. The second thing is how unprepared families are for what comes after a death. Most people don't know that cleanup isn't covered under standard homeowners insurance in most states. They don't know that professional remediation can cost anywhere from $1,500 to $30,000 depending on the situation. They find out in the worst possible moment. And the third thing, the one that still sits with me, is how quickly the physical evidence of a life disappears. They come in, we work for hours, sometimes days, and when we leave, there is almost no trace that anyone was ever there. The room is clean. The smell is gone. The stains are gone. A life reduced to a job ticket. I left the industry after 10 years. Not because of a single scene. Because of the accumulation. There's a term in occupational psychology called secondary traumatic stress. It's what happens when you're repeatedly exposed to other people's trauma. It doesn't require you to be the victim. It just requires proximity and time. The symptoms are quiet at first. You stop sleeping as well. You find yourself scanning rooms when you enter them, out of habit. You have a harder time letting go of small things. I didn't talk about it for a long time. In this industry, you don't. You compartmentalize. You put it in a box, and you close the lid and you go to the next job. But boxes have a limit. I want to be honest about something before I close this. I don't regret the work. The families who thanked us, who said they couldn't have gotten through it without us, who wrote letters months later saying they were finally able to go back into that room and sit in it, that mattered. That still matters. There is something deeply human about restoring a space after tragedy, about saying, with your hands, that this place can hold life again. I just had to learn when it was time to let someone else carry it. The next time a news story fades to black after covering a crime, remember that someone still has to walk in after, someone still has to restore that space so life can continue. And they do it without cameras, without recognition, without anyone knowing their name. If you've ever wondered about the parts of America that don't make it into the headlines, that's what this channel is for. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.